as people are shifting around a little bit, we hope you'll come back and join us for what I think is going to be a very interesting discussion. Let me thank Guillermo for moderating that discussion, and Kristalina, thank you very much for the wonderful insights that you gave us about how the World Bank is adapting to the changes and the opportunities and the risks that exist today. And I think you gave us a real challenge in terms of what we as private citizens and others from outside the World Bank can do to, and the World Bank Group can do to help create support for this organization. I'm Jim Kolbe. I'm co-chair of the Bretton Woods Committee. I guess I come to that position by virtue of the fact that I'm a recovering former member of Congress. I hope you won't hold that too much against me here this afternoon. But it's a great pleasure for me to be here and to welcome to the stage with me President Takehiko Nakao of the Asia Development Bank. And so I'm going to sit down, take us a couple of words of introduction for him, and we'll get our conversation started here. Thank you again. Well, Mr. Nakao is, as you know, president of the Asia Development Bank. He's now celebrating, I believe this month, your 3rd anniversary as the president of the bank. But it comes from a long background in international finance and the world of finance itself. 3 decades of work mostly in the Japanese Ministry of Finance, including being vice minister for international finance, and served for a time here in Washington, D.C. with the Japanese embassy, and has been a visiting professor at the University of Tokyo. So is very qualified to talk about some of these issues that we have here today. Mr. Kao, again, thank you very much for joining us here. This is an important milestone, your 50th anniversary, the bank's 50th anniversary. And so it might be a good time, perhaps, for a little reflection on what the bank might be thinking about in terms of where it is going, how it needs to reinvent itself, what kind of changes need to be made, and what you see the future for the bank. So let me just give you that kind of broad question as an opening one. I will come to a couple more specific ones as we go forward.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to join this meeting today. And so 50 years anniversaries, and we was, is the mic working? Yeah, yes.
Let's see if this one is.
Okay. So I'll use this
There
way.
you go, you got it, it's got it.
So 50 years ago, ADB was established. And at that moment, in the beginning, America was not very forthcoming because there was already World Bank. But because the Inter-American Development Bank was already established in 1960, and also African Development Bank was founded in 1964. There was a very strong wish among Asian countries to have our bank, Asian Bank. But there was the idea that we should have a bank without non-regional members like America, because African Development Bank didn't have non-regional members, including Europeans. So, but the Japanese planners and also other peoples in Asia wanted to have the bank, and the idea was it's better, we need to involve non-regional members, including America or Canada and also European countries, because Asia was in shortage of funding. Japan was continuing to have a current account deficit, and also Japan was the only developed countries among Asia. So the idea was to establish a bank to mobilize resources from America or European capital markets. And Eugene Black, who was president of the World Bank, advised ADB. So the first bond issue was in 1969 in Mark, in Frankfurt, and in 1970, the ADB issued first samurai bond, yen-denominated bond in Tokyo market, and in 1971 in American capital market. So the idea is not just the public finance, but it is how to mobilize resources from private sector. That's what I really want to mention. And in these 50 years, the membership was widened to include China in 1986. In the beginning, it was Taipei, China. And India was not the borrowing member because if India starts borrowing, the resources evaporated. But in 1986, it started borrowing in addition to the World Bank. And Vietnam, Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia, those are basically founding members, but they were detached because of conflict, but they became once again re-engaged in 1990s, started borrowing a lot. And also transition economies in Central Asia started become members in 1990s. So through financing together with the knowledge and through policy discussions about how to make system more open, open trade and investment regimes, prudent macroeconomic policies, deregulations, governance, inclusiveness, those policies were promoted by ADB with the very candid discussions, together with the discussion with the IMF and the World Bank. I don't think there is no other way than the kind of a Bretton Woods consensus or Washington consensus or whatever, prudent macroeconomic policies, investment in infrastructure, people, and so on. There is no other option. So Asia has grown based on these good policies, and I really believe ADB has been part of it, especially the joining of China in 1986 by keeping Taipei, China as a member in the separate ED's executive directors constituency out of 12 was very success. And Asia is now more integrated, but also very open economies as a whole, and that was a reason for success. We need to keep this momentum, and there are so many pessimistic ideas about the future of the world, including secular stagnation. But as far as Asia is concerned, even after the global financial crisis, Asia has been growing at the pace of 6% or so. China is moderating, but India is growing at the pace of more than 7%. Myanmar has started growth, and Vietnam's, Bangladesh, these countries are also growing very strong. So as far as Asia is concerned, it's too early to worry about the stagnations. People want to spend more for air conditions, fans, and bikes, and automobiles, and cosmetics, and sightseeing. There is a strong demand. Why do we need to worry about stagnation in Asia? As far as the policies are appropriate, I think Asia can continue to grow.
Well, you've articulated a fairly optimistic future. There we go. That's probably easier for you. You've articulated a fairly optimistic future for Asia and its development. Going forward, what kind of trends do you see are going to be? You've all mentioned what's happened with China. You've mentioned what's happened with India, the fact that the Southeast Asia countries have joined or rejoined the bank. What do you see happening in the next, say, decade or so? What would you look for?
Yeah. It doesn't work. Is this working? Or?
Let's see. Let me see if that's on. Let me see if I can.
Okay. There is a switch. So I'm generally optimistic because there are so many pessimistic ideas in the world, including secular stagnation and so on. But at the same time, Asia cannot be complacent. We have so many challenges. One challenge, imminent challenge, is whether the slowdown of Chinese economy is going smoothly, and there is a lot of investment after the global financial crisis. There is some over-investment in some areas. So the Chinese authorities know it, and I visit China at least twice or 3 times a year, and I always have a very deep discussion with the Minister of Finance or other authorities. And China's transition to more consumption dependent, more service sector dependent instead of investment and manufacturing is one challenge. India, I met Prime Minister Modi twice, and he's so determined, and he has been successful in making tax system more integrated through goods and service tax and other reforms. But can they sustain it? And it's so, kind of states' powers are very strong. So how to integrate the economy within the countries and also integrate with the other part of Asia. Success of Asia, East Asia was
dependent on the supply network or production networks, supply chains. They were exporting, importing each other, and dependent on comparative advantage of countries, they trade a lot. India is more domestic oriented, but can it be totally open, integrated economy to other part of the economies? Indonesia also has many issues, including resource-dependent nature, but President Widodo is also so determined to deregulate the economies. There are so many good news, but whether we can keep momentum of the reforms, keep prudent economic policies, and whether we can manage the spirit of corporations and to manage the differences of opinions, ideas between countries. That is a very important point.
You mentioned that India has a very much a domestic orientation to its market. China, on the other hand, has always had a very export-oriented market. Do you see China rebalancing itself in some way and becoming much more domestic-oriented in its marketplace?
I would say that China is already becoming much more domestic demand-oriented. Current account surplus was more than 10% of GDP before the global financial crisis. But the current account surplus today is like 2% or 2.5%. So during this process, the growth has been more dependent on domestic demand, especially these days consumption. So I think it's a kind of illusion that as if we are talking about China as an export-oriented country forever. It is becoming more domestic-oriented. But the problem is maybe the combinations of the balance of consumption and investment. It is still so much dependent on investment, including real estate investment or public investment. They must promote more consumption. But I think Chinese consumers are so keen about consuming things. So I think, and over time, the service sector will be developed. Some of the service sector is still informal, but while economy continues to grow, people spend more for services. So I'm also a little bit optimistic about these transitions of the Chinese economy.
Let me turn to a topic that has come up with both of the earlier speakers that we had here today, and that is the rising resentment or pushback against multilateralism that you see, not just in this country, but in Europe and other countries as well. Do you see this as having an impact on the work of the Asia Development Bank and the development that's taking place in Asia? How do you see the challenges of the pushback against multilateralism that you certainly see in this country and elsewhere?
First of all, I'd like to mention that the multilateral approach after the World War II, including Bretton's system, such systems like ADB, has been very important factor of securing the stability and also the development of countries. So we need to continue to promote that idea. But at the same time, I think people are now starting looking at how about our life? And this is not really political kind of discussion, which I would say multilateralism is important. But at the same time, it is also true that many factory workers, mine workers, those ordinary people on the ground, especially in advanced economies, because wages are converging during the process of globalization, the technological advancement. Generally speaking, wages of developing countries are going up, while wages of workers who do the same textile factory works in advanced economies, those wages tend to go lower in real, real value. So it is true that some peoples are not gaining as much benefit as others. How should we address those peoples? And in the European system, I've been following, as you mentioned, kindly following these G7, G20 discussions, European crisis for years. And from my perspective, we need a very good balance of multilateral system, union, cooperation, or the kind of the community, but also we need a strong sovereign states, because sovereign states can collect tax, regulate people, sue people for crimes, and also it is providing more welfare. So we can go toward the community, but at the same time, I think people are paying more attention to what are the sovereignties, what are the role of the governments, and we need a balance. I don't think necessarily this movement in Brexit or European continent or in the United States are the tipping time to go back to the bloc economies, total protectionism or total bilateralism. I don't want to see that, but we may face a certain time of reflecting what should be the objective goal of multilateralism. I think I speak more on my own instead of as a president of ADB. Again, about Asia, our role has been very important, and I still believe we can continue to support development, poverty reduction, genders, climate change, and also the friendship between countries. But at the same time, we cannot easily deny the ideas of ordinary people. That is my idea.
Before I turn to the audience for a couple of questions in our remaining time, your last comment raises one other point. As one of his very first acts as president, President Trump put the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade agreement, let's say, at least on the lower shelf, if not in the deep freeze. And I'm just wondering whether you think that has created some openings for China or other countries, or do you see the growth now or the resurgence of bilateral agreements? How do you think this may play out in the year ahead?
In a sense, it's very nice that China has now been promoting the idea of a free trade. But of course, China's domestic system is not totally open yet, and some people are worried about some stringent approach to some foreign companies. But it's very good that China is basically oriented toward the open system. But at the same time, America's policy, of course, it's not good for the most of our members of TPP that the United States wouldn't join it. But how to manage our open trade system as much as possible? It's one thing that we cannot have a new agreement, and it's better to have a new agreement. But at the same time, what is important is how we can keep open trade and investment regime that we have now. So I'm not overly pessimistic or totally kind of disappointed. We should make efforts, continued effort to keep the basically open trade and investment regime. I don't think America's role will be replaced by China so quickly, easily.
Thank you for those comments. Let me turn to the audience and see. We have a few moments for a couple of questions. If there's a question, do I see one back there? Yes, ma'am. Wait for the microphone and please identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Tia. I'm with the New Rules in Global Finance CSO, and I have a question about if the Asian Development Bank has any specific programs in place to combat gender inequality in the workforce.
So we are paying great attention to gender issues because without empowerment of women, without the participation of women in many fronts, including works, but also the governance of government and the communities, we cannot sustain growth. And for ADB, gender issues are two fronts. One is about our operations. We started gender strategy in 1970s, and at that moment it was specifically women-oriented education program or health program and so on. But today, we have had many years of making our agenda mainstream for any project, including infrastructure project. When we build highways, we have a capacity building so that women use this road, rural road and the highways to access better workplace and also to health and so on. So women's gender issues in operation, but at the same time, in our workforce, among our international staff, which is a more, I would say, professional, although all people are professional, out of 1,100, about 1,000 are now women, but we are now targeting 40% at least, and also in the executives levels, higher than director levels, we are also targeting 40% at least. So those are sometimes not so easy because we are more focused on infrastructure, and graduates at this moment from civil engineering, for instance, is a smaller number compared to men, but we are making hard, difficult, very serious attention efforts to make a balance of agenda.
Thank you for that answer. Another question. Yes, sir, in the back there. There's two hands up. We'll take the one, yes, so, and then in front of you after that.
Thank you very much. Is this working?
Just press the bottom, I think.
Yes.
There you go.
Thank you very much. I'm Isaac Cohen. I am with CNN en Español. My question for you today is, are you having any kind of working relationship with China's Infrastructure Development Bank? Thank you.
Yeah, it's often asked questions, and we have been cooperating very closely with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, and I had 9 times a discussion bilaterally with President Jin of AIIB. He was vice president of ADB before, and he has had a very similar experience with me, like Minister of Finance of China in the international side, working for the World Bank and so on. So I have so many things in common with him, and we shared, I mean, ADB has shared a lot of experiences of safeguard policies for social and economic environmental impact of the projects. We also supported the development of policies for many issues, including legal issues, accounting issues, and how to avoid the integrity issues. So we have shared so many things together, and as I said, I had 9 meetings, and we already co-financed with the AIB for 3 projects. One highway project in Pakistan, one natural gas project in Bangladesh, and one new project in Georgia for, once again, road. So we have a huge infrastructure needs in Asia, and according to the recent estimate of us, every year we need $1.7 billion, $1.7 trillion of investment needs for infrastructure among Asian countries. Of course, much of them is taken care by the domestic resources, including taxpayers' money, government bond, and also private sector. But there are many things the banks like us, multilateral development, can do, and we do it, the World Bank do it. We are scaling up our operations. We are strengthening our sector and thematic ideas. We are streamlining procedures to shorten, speed up our procedures. But it's nice to have a new bank like AIB, and we are cooperating. We have so many things together.
Your mention of the dollar amount of needs in infrastructure certainly reminds us of how great the infrastructure needs are and the cost of that in a place like Asia. I think we'll have the final question right there.
Yes, hello. My name is Nathaniel Welch, and I'm also with the CSO New Rules for Global Finance. I was curious if the ADB has, if the ADB has had any internal issues regarding sort of modern geographical conflicts between member states, such as the South China Sea dispute or the Senkaku Islands issue, or other sort of historical concerns dating back to imperialism in World War II. I'm just curious if that plays any role or if it's much more driven and focused in its design. Thank you.
Basically, we are apolitical, or we are separate from political issues, and we don't go into the political discussion. But all I can say is ADB has been making a certain contribution to cementing the friendship between countries. So, for instance, India and Pakistan There are some issues recently, but in many discussions at the ADB and also our meetings outside the ADB, they sit together and talk about how to enhance connectivity between these countries. So there are many issues in Asia remaining, but compared to 1960s when it was established, at that moment there was a Vietnam War and Cultural Revolution, and many countries are not integrated in the market system. Many countries pursued anti-colonialism or protectionistic import substitute policies. And there was a conflict in Cambodia in 1970s. There was a conflict in Sri Lanka. So there were so many conflicts. But today it's much more stable, although there are remaining issues. So I'm sorry to say this, but I think the reasons for the Asian success so far, at least to some extent, are based on 8 conditions. One is investment in the infrastructure, especially China was so keen about infrastructure investment. Investment in health and education. Many countries in Asia pay special attention to primary school education, higher education, and so on. Third is open trade and investment regime. Many countries didn't have it in 1970s or 80s because they were more taken by the ideas of the center, peripheral theories. It's better to avoid exploitation by developed countries by rushing into the industrialization, by protecting industry. It didn't work well. So open trade and investment regime was so important. Foreign direct investment is important. Governance is important, especially stronger kind of official sector to guide the economy well is important. And also inclusiveness is important, how to redistribute income and asset and so on. And the vision is important. If we look at the policies of Korea and Singapore, it was because of the visions the leaders had it. And it's not the central control economy or not. We need a vision for any countries. And I think some countries, Asia, successfully did it. But one of the most important elements is stability in the region. As I said, there were so many conflicts. And now those countries outside the ADB in the beginning, China joined in ADB in 1986, and the regions, Greater Mekong sub-regions, countries became full members, re-engaged in 1990s. And overall, Asia has managed the stability. So although I cannot answer to your question directly, what I want to say is ADB has making contribution to cement friendship, cooperation. And I visit the countries every year for different countries, and I meet leaders, and I think that is one of the ways to support cooperation. And also, we'll have an annual meeting in Yokohama in May, the 50 years anniversary meeting. All countries, ministers will join us. That is another way to kind of enhance spirit of cooperation. I think that is one of the very important functions of us.
Thank you very much. That last answer to that question certainly gives us a great summary of both the opportunities and the challenges that face the Asia Development Bank. We thank you very much, and please join me in thanking President Nakao for
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.